The fork in my hand felt heavier than it should have as I watched Cedric Fallon lean back in his chair, that insufferable grin spreading across his face like spilled wine on white linen. The rooftop restaurant buzzed with the kind of pretentious chatter that made my teeth ache, but all I could hear was the sound of my wife Veda's nervous laughter echoing off the glass walls. "You know, Wes," Cedric said, swirling his overpriced whiskey, "Veda tells me everything about you two. You're quite the project at home, aren't you?" My wife blushed. Actually blushed. Like some schoolgirl caught passing notes instead of a 34-year-old attorney who'd built her career on keeping her composure in courtrooms full of hostile witnesses. I set down my fork with deliberate precision, the small clink against the porcelain plate somehow managing to cut through the ambient noise. Marlowe Trasker, Veda's law partner, watched me with those calculating eyes of his, probably wondering if I'd finally snap. The man had been pushing buttons all evening, making subtle digs about my modest accounting practice while praising Cedric's dynamic approach to business development. "Project," I repeated, tasting the word like it was something rotten. "That's an interesting choice of words, Cedric." Veda's hand moved to her wine glass, fingers trembling just enough that I noticed. "After 17 years of marriage, you learn to read the signs." She was nervous about something, and it wasn't just her boss's inappropriate comment. I reached into my wallet and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills, placing them on the table with the same care I'd use handling evidence in a fraud investigation. The gesture was theatrical, sure, but sometimes theater is exactly what a situation demands. "Keep the change," I said, standing slowly. "You'll need it when the IRS audit I triggered finishes up." The silence that followed was beautiful. Cedric's face went through several interesting color changes, settling on a pale green that matched the restaurant's accent lighting. Marlowe's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, and Veda looked like she'd been slapped. "What audit?" Cedric managed to croak. I straightened my tie, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. "The one that started when I noticed some irregularities in your company's tax filings. Funny thing about being a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud, you develop an eye for creative bookkeeping." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Veda? Don't wait up, I have some files to review." The elevator ride down felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline coursing through my system like electricity. I'd just declared war on my wife's boss, possibly destroyed my marriage, and potentially ruined whatever was left of my professional reputation in this city. But as I walked out into the cool New England evening, breathing in air that didn't smell like expensive cologne and desperation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: satisfaction. My phone buzzed before I'd made it 2 blocks. A text from Veda. "What have you done?" I typed back, what I should have done months ago. The truth was, I'd been watching Cedric's company for weeks. Not officially, that would have been a conflict of interest given Veda's professional relationship with his firm. But when your wife starts working late every night and coming home smelling like someone else's aftershave, you start paying attention to details. Fallon and Associates claimed to be a business consulting firm, but their client list read like a who's who of companies that specialized in moving money through creative channels. Shell corporations, offshore accounts, consulting fees that never seemed to result in any actual consulting. It was a textbook example of what we in the business call aggressive tax planning. The really interesting part was how many of those transactions had been processed through real estate deals that Veda's firm had handled. Property management fees, development consulting, acquisition advisory services, all perfectly legal on the surface, but when you added them up, they painted a picture that would make the IRS very, very interested. I hadn't actually triggered an audit yet. That would require filing a formal complaint, and I needed more evidence before I took that step. But Cedric didn't know that, and sometimes a well-timed bluff is worth more than a smoking gun. My phone rang as I reached my car, Veda's name flashed on the screen. "You need to fix this," she said without preamble. "Right now." "Fix what, exactly?" "Don't play games with me, Wes. Cedric is talking about calling his lawyer. This could destroy everything I've worked for." I got into my car, but didn't start the engine. The parking garage was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic above. "Everything you've worked for? What about what we've worked for? What about our marriage?" "Our marriage?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When was the last time you paid attention to anything besides your spreadsheets and your conspiracy theories about my job?" "Conspiracy theories? Right." I started the engine. "Tell me something, Veda. How long have you been sharing details about my work with Cedric?" The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Then explain it to me. Explain why my wife is discussing my cases with a man I suspect is laundering money through her real estate deals. Explain why you've been coming home at midnight every night for the past 3 months. Explain why our joint checking account has been slowly drained while you've been building up a separate savings account I'm not supposed to know about." Another pause, longer this time. "I want a divorce," she said quietly. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but it wasn't surprise. I'd known this was coming, had probably known it for months. "There it is. Marlowe thinks—" "Marlowe thinks?" I cut her off. "Since when do you need Marlowe's permission to make decisions about our marriage?" "He's been helping me understand my options." "I bet he has." I put the car in drive. "Let me guess. He's also been helping you understand how to hide assets during a divorce proceeding. Very thoughtful of him." "Wes, please. Just come home and we can talk about this like adults." "Like adults." I pulled out of the parking garage into traffic. "You mean the way adults have honest conversations about their marriages instead of plotting behind their spouse's back with their business partners?" I hung up before she could respond. The drive home took 20 minutes, but I used the time to think. Veda wanted a divorce, which meant she'd been planning this for a while. Marlowe was involved, which meant they'd been strategizing about how to minimize her financial exposure. And Cedric's reaction to my audit threat suggested there was definitely something worth hiding in his books. The question was, how deep did this go? I parked in our driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house we'd bought together 7 years ago. It needed work, the shutters were peeling, the front steps had a crack that kept getting wider every winter, and the landscaping looked like something from a haunted house movie. But it was ours, or had been ours. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. Tomorrow 2 p.m., Riverside Diner. Come alone. R. R. That had to be Rowan Carrick, the lawyer Veda had mentioned hiring for the divorce. We'd gone to college together, back when the world seemed simpler and people actually meant what they said. I hadn't talked to him in years, but apparently he was about to become a very important part of my life. I typed back, "I'll be there." Inside the house, I went straight to my home office and fired up my computer. If Veda wanted to play hardball, she was about to discover that forensic accountants don't just find hidden money. We're also very good at hiding our own tracks. The hard drive I pulled from my safe contained copies of every financial document I'd ever handled, including several cases that had involved companies with very creative approaches to tax compliance. If Cedric thought he was clever, he was about to get a masterclass in what real financial investigation looked like. I started with the obvious stuff: bank records, tax filings, corporate registrations, but the real treasure was in the metadata, the digital fingerprints that most people don't even know exist. Every document tells a story about when it was created, who modified it, and what systems it passed through. And Cedric's documents were telling a very interesting story indeed. By 3 a.m, I had enough evidence to bury him. Shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, and a paper trail that connected his consulting fees to at least 6 different organizations that the Treasury Department had flagged for suspicious activity. But the real surprise was finding Veda's digital signature on documents that she'd claimed to know nothing about: property transfers, escrow arrangements, and legal opinions that had facilitated the movement of over $4 million through real estate transactions that existed only on paper. My wife wasn't just having an affair with her boss, she was actively participating in his money laundering operation. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. The smart thing would be to take this evidence to the FBI and let them handle it. But the smart thing wouldn't give me the satisfaction I was looking for. And after watching Cedric humiliate me in front of half the legal community tonight, satisfaction was exactly what I wanted. I opened a new document and started typing. If they wanted to play games, I was about to change the rules entirely. The Riverside Diner smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams, which seemed appropriate for a meeting with a man who was about to help destroy my marriage. Rowan Carrick sat in a corner booth, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit among the truckers and shift workers who made up the diner's usual clientele. He'd aged well, I had to admit. Still had most of his hair, still carried himself with that easy confidence that had made him popular in college. But there was something different about his eyes now, a calculating quality that hadn't been there when we were 22 and thought we were going to change the world. "Wes," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Thanks for coming." "Wouldn't miss it." I slid into the booth across from him. Though I have to say, this is an interesting choice of venue for a legal consultation. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I thought we should talk somewhere private, away from prying ears." The waitress came over, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who'd probably been working this job since before I was born. I ordered coffee. Rowan already had a cup in front of him, untouched and growing cold. "So," I said once we were alone again, "I assume Veda hired you to handle the divorce." "She did." He pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table between us. "But before we get into that, I wanted to talk to you about last night." "What about it?" "Cedric is concerned about your threats. He's asked me to find out exactly what you think you know about his business." I took a sip of coffee. It was as bad as it smelled. "That's interesting. I thought you were representing my wife, not her boss." "I represent several clients in this situation. Sometimes interests align, and sometimes they don't." I leaned forward. "Tell me something, Rowan. How long have you known Cedric?" "We went to college together, same as you and me." "Right, and I'm sure it's just a coincidence that my wife ended up hiring his college roommate to handle her divorce." Rowan's expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around his eyes. Veda came to me because she needed someone she could trust, someone who understood the complexities of her situation. Her situation. I repeated the phrase slowly. "You mean her affair with her boss, or her involvement in his money laundering scheme?" Now he reacted. The folder in his hands shifted slightly, and he glanced toward the door like he was considering making a run for it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Sure you don't." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, placing it on the table next to his folder. "Recognize this?" It was a bank transfer record, one of dozens I'd found in Cedric's files, but this one was special because it showed a payment of $50,000 from one of his shell companies to Carrick & Associates, Rowan's law firm. "Consulting fee," he said after a moment. "For what kind of consulting?" "Legal advice, corporate structure recommendations." "Funny thing about that," I said, pulling out another document. "This is the incorporation paperwork for Meridian Holdings, one of Cedric's shell companies, filed 6 months ago. And this," I tapped the signature line, "is your name as the registered agent." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers like they might spontaneously combust if he looked hard enough. "What do you want, Wes?" "I want to know how deep this goes. I want to know how long you've been working with Cedric, and I want to know exactly what role my wife plays in all of this." Your wife is innocent. She doesn't know about the financial arrangements. Really? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a screenshot I'd taken that morning. This is a text message from Veda to Cedric, sent 3 weeks ago. The Patterson property transfer is complete. Funds cleared as discussed. When do we move on the next phase? The color drained from Rowan's face. Still think she's innocent? He closed the folder and leaned back in the booth. You're in over your head here, Wes. There are people involved in this who don't appreciate complications. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice from an old college friend. I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Old college friends don't usually help destroy each other's marriages for money. Your marriage was already over. Veda came to me because she needed help getting out cleanly. Getting out cleanly or getting out rich? Rowan stood up, leaving a 20 on the table. I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened. I suggest you do the same. Sit down, Rowan. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he hesitated. I said sit down. He sat. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. You're going to tell me everything. How this started, how long it's been going on, and exactly what Veda knows. And then you're going to help me figure out how to end it. Why would I do that? I pulled out my phone again and showed him another screenshot. This one was from his own email account, a message to Cedric discussing the Talron problem and strategies for neutralizing potential exposure. Because if you don't, this goes to the FBI along with everything else I've found. And something tells me that your law license won't survive the investigation that follows. Rowan stared at the phone for a long moment, then rubbed his face with both hands. It started 18 months ago, he said finally. Cedric approached me about setting up some corporate structures for international clients. Nothing unusual at first, just standard tax optimization strategies. When did it become not standard? When the amount started getting bigger, and when the clients started paying in cash. How much bigger? $18 million over the past year. I felt my stomach drop. 18 million? Mostly from South American sources. Construction companies, import-export businesses, agricultural concerns, all technically legitimate, but probably not as legitimate as they appear on paper. Probably not. And Veda? Rowan was quiet for a moment. She started asking questions about 6 months ago. Noticed patterns in the real estate transactions she was handling for Cedric's clients. She's smart, Wes. Smarter than Cedric gave her credit for. So she figured out what was happening. She figured out enough to become a problem. Cedric was worried she might go to the authorities. So he seduced her instead. He made her an offer, a partnership, a chance to make more money than she'd ever dreamed of, and the security of knowing she was part of the operation instead of a threat to it. I felt something cold and angry settling in my chest. And she said yes. She said yes. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all pressing down on me like a physical thing. My wife hadn't just had an affair. She'd chosen to become a criminal. There's something else, Rowan said quietly. What? Marlowe knows about all of it. He's been helping coordinate the legal aspects of the operation from the beginning. So my wife's law partner is also involved. He's the one who suggested bringing Veda in, said she was getting too close to the truth, and it would be safer to make her complicit than to try to keep her in the dark. I closed my eyes and tried to process what I was hearing. The woman I'd been married to for 17 years had been systematically betraying me for months, not just personally, but professionally. And her business partner, a man I'd had dinner with, whose kids had played with our neighbor's children, had orchestrated the whole thing. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Rowan looked uncomfortable. Because Cedric wants to make you the same offer. What? He thinks you're too dangerous to leave as an enemy. Your background in forensic accounting, your military intelligence experience, you could cause serious problems for the operation if you decided to go to the authorities. So he wants to buy me off. He wants to bring you in, make you part of the team. There's a lot of money involved, Wes, enough to set you up for life. I stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide if he was serious. You really think I'd agree to that? After what they've done to me? I think you should consider it carefully, because the alternative might not be very pleasant. There it was, the threat I'd been waiting for. And if I refuse? Then things could get complicated for you. Your professional reputation, your personal safety, your financial security, all of that becomes uncertain. I nodded slowly, like I was actually considering his words. I see. So you'll think about it? Oh, I'll definitely think about it. I stood up and dropped another 20 on the table. In fact, I'm thinking about it right now. And? I leaned down so my face was close to his. I'm thinking that you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I walked out of the diner feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my future, all of it had been built on lies. But as I got in my car and started the engine, I realized something else. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, and anger, properly channeled, could be a very useful thing. My phone buzzed with a text from Veda. Rowan says you two had a good talk. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I typed back. Oh, I'm being very reasonable. But as I drove home, I was already planning my next move. If they wanted to play games with my life, they were about to discover that I was much better at games than they realized. The beauty of being a forensic accountant is that you learn to think like a criminal. You have to understand how money moves, how records get falsified, and how seemingly legitimate transactions can hide illegal activity. After 17 years in the business, I'd developed what my old military intelligence instructor used to call criminal empathy, the ability to think 3 steps ahead of someone trying to hide something. Cedric and his associates were about to get a master class in exactly how dangerous that skill could be. I spent the next 3 days building a complete picture of their operation: bank records, property transfers, corporate filings, tax documents. I pulled everything I could access legally, and a few things that existed in the gray areas of digital investigation. The picture that emerged was both impressive and terrifying. $18 million was just the beginning. Going back 2 years, I found evidence of transactions totaling over $40 million, all of it flowing through a network of shell companies, real estate deals, and consulting arrangements that would have made the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Unit salivate. But the real revelation came when I started digging into the sources of the money. Cedric hadn't been lying when he said his clients were mostly South American businesses. What he'd failed to mention was that several of those businesses were front organizations for groups that the DEA had been tracking for years. My wife wasn't just laundering money, she was laundering drug money. I printed out the most damning documents and organized them into a file that would make any prosecutor's career. Then I made copies of everything and stored them in 3 different locations: my office safe, a safety deposit box, and a cloud storage account that Veda didn't know existed. But before I took any of this to the authorities, I wanted to understand exactly how deep the corruption went. And that meant paying a visit to someone who might have answers. Arnold Hutchins worked security for Cedric's company. Former military police, built like a linebacker, and rumored to handle the kind of problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. If Cedric was worried about threats to his operation, Arnold would be the one tasked with dealing with them. I found him at Murphy's Gym, a rundown boxing facility in the warehouse district that catered to serious fighters and people who wanted to hit things without asking too many questions. Arnold was working the heavy bag when I walked in, his movements precise and economical, despite his size. "Arnold," I called out. He turned, sweat dripping from his forehead, and gave me the kind of look that suggested he'd been expecting this conversation. "Wes Talron, heard you might be stopping by." "Did you now?" I approached slowly, keeping my hands visible. Arnold might be a criminal, but he was also a professional, and professionals didn't start trouble without good reason. Cedric mentioned you might have some concerns about recent business arrangements. Concerns? I nodded. That's one way to put it. Arnold unwrapped his hands and reached for a towel. He also mentioned you might be willing to listen to reason. I'm always willing to listen. Question is whether what I'm hearing makes sense. Smart man. He gestured toward a bench in the corner. Let's sit. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of other fighters training echoing through the gym. Arnold was studying me, probably trying to figure out whether I was scared enough to be rational or angry enough to be dangerous. Your wife's in deep, he said finally. How deep? Deep enough that walking away isn't really an option anymore, for any of you. Explain that. Arnold looked around the gym, then leaned closer. The people we work with don't like complications. They especially don't like complications that involve law enforcement. And they think I'm a complication. They think you're a threat, and threats get eliminated. There it was. The explicit threat that Rowan had only hinted at. What if I told you I wasn't interested in going to law enforcement? I'd say that's smart, but I'd also say it might be too late for that. Why? Because someone already has. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? I mean, there's an FBI task force that's been looking into Cedric's operation for the past 6 months, and someone's been feeding them information. Who? Arnold smiled, but there wasn't any humor in it. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I tried to process what he was telling me. If the FBI was already investigating, then everything I'd discovered was probably redundant. But it also meant that someone in Cedric's organization was cooperating with law enforcement, which changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Does Cedric know? He suspects. That's why he's been trying to bring you into the fold. Better to have you inside the tent than outside causing problems. And if I refuse? Arnold stood up and started rewrapping his hands. Then we have a problem. We. You, me, your wife, Cedric, Marlowe, all of us. Because if this operation goes down, everyone goes down with it. I watched him work the heavy bag for a few more minutes, thinking about what he'd told me. If there was already an FBI investigation, then my evidence might not be as valuable as I'd thought. But it also meant that someone in the organization was vulnerable, and vulnerable people made mistakes. Arnold, I said as I got up to leave. Yeah? Tell Cedric I'll consider his offer, but I need some time to think about it. How much time? A few days? He nodded. I'll pass that along. But don't take too long, Wes. Time's not really on anyone's side right now. I left the gym feeling like I was walking through a minefield. Every step could trigger an explosion that would destroy what was left of my life. But as I drove home, I realized that I might have just learned something important. Someone in Cedric's organization was cooperating with the FBI, and if I could figure out who, I might be able to use that information to my advantage. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway, Veda's name on the screen. Where have you been? She demanded. I've been calling all afternoon. Out, I said, thinking about our situation. And I think we need to talk, face to face. About what? About your boyfriend's business arrangements, about your involvement in them, and about what happens next. There was a long pause. Wes, I don't think you understand how serious this is. Oh, I understand perfectly. The question is whether you do. What's that supposed to mean? It means come home, Veda. We have a lot to discuss. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my car for a few more minutes, watching the house we'd bought together when we still believed in forever. The crack in the front steps had gotten bigger, I noticed. Everything was falling apart, piece by piece. But as I got out of the car and walked toward the front door, I was already planning my next move. If Veda wanted to play games with criminals, She was about to discover that her husband had learned a few tricks during his years investigating financial crimes, and unlike her new associates, I actually knew how to win. Veda was waiting in the living room when I came inside, sitting on the couch we'd bought for our 5th anniversary. She'd changed clothes since the dinner. Gone was the professional attorney look, replaced by jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and more vulnerable. It was a calculated choice, I realized. She wanted to remind me of the woman I'd fallen in love with. "You look tired," she said. "I've been busy." I sat down in the chair across from her, maintaining distance. "Learning about my wife's new career." "Wes, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you've been laundering drug money through your real estate practice? How you've been sharing details about my work with criminals? Or how you and your business partner have been planning to destroy my reputation as part of your exit strategy?" She flinched at each accusation, but didn't deny any of them. "It's not what you think," she said finally. "Then tell me what it is." Veda stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our neglected garden. It started innocently. Cedric asked me to handle some property transactions for his clients. International investors, he said. People who wanted to move money into American real estate. "When did you realize it wasn't innocent?" "About 4 months ago. The amounts were getting larger, and the buyers were paying in cash. All cash. Nobody pays $3 million for a commercial property with a briefcase full of hundreds unless they're trying to hide something. So you confronted him about it." I tried to back out, told him I was uncomfortable with the arrangements, and wanted to refer his clients to other attorneys. "And?" She turned away from the window. "And he showed me how deep I was already in, how many transactions I'd already facilitated, how it would look to prosecutors if they decided to investigate. So he blackmailed you into continuing. He offered me a choice: keep working with him as a partner, or face the consequences as an unwitting accomplice." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. After 17 years of marriage, I could usually tell when she was lying. But this felt different, more complicated. "What about the affair?" "What about it?" "Don't play games with me, Veda. I've seen the text messages, the hotel receipts, the way you look at him." She was quiet for a long moment. "That wasn't part of the plan." "Whose plan?" "Marlowe's. He thought if I got personally involved with Cedric, it would give us more leverage, more protection." "So you slept with him as a business strategy." "I slept with him because I was scared and lonely, and you'd been treating me like a stranger for months." That hit harder than I'd expected, because there was truth in it. I had been distant, distracted by work and suspicions I couldn't quite articulate, but that didn't excuse what she'd done. And now? Now I'm trapped. We all are. Cedric, Marlowe, me. We're all in too deep to get out cleanly. "What about me?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you. They want to bring you in, make you part of the operation. There's enough money involved to set us up for life, Wes. We could disappear, start over somewhere else." I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "You really think I'd agree to that?" "I think you should consider it, because the alternative is that we all go to prison." "All of us?" "There's an FBI investigation, Wes. They've been watching Cedric for months, and if they decide to move forward with charges, everyone connected to the operation is going to get swept up in it." So Arnold had been telling the truth about the FBI investigation, but Veda's version was different. She seemed to think it was still in the early stages, not the advanced investigation Arnold had described. "How do you know about the FBI?" "Rowan has contacts in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They've been monitoring the situation." "Monitoring it, or feeding information to it?" Veda looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, someone in your organization has been cooperating with law enforcement. Someone's been passing information to the FBI about Cedric's operation." The color drained from her face. "That's impossible." "Is it? Think about it, Veda. Who would have access to all the financial records? Who would know about all the transactions? Who would have the legal expertise to understand exactly what evidence prosecutors would need? You think it's Rowan. I think it's someone. And I think that someone has been playing all of you. She sat down heavily on the couch, like her legs couldn't support her anymore. If that's true, then you're not just trapped in a criminal conspiracy. You're trapped in a criminal conspiracy that's already been compromised, which means everyone involved is expendable. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number again. Time's up. We need to meet. Tonight. Riverside Park, 10 p.m. Come alone. I showed the message to Veda. Recognize the number? She shook her head. Who is it? I think it's someone who wants to have a conversation about our mutual problem. Wes, don't. It's too dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. I stood up and headed for the door. The question is whether we're going to be victims or whether we're going to fight back. What are you talking about? I turned back to her. I'm talking about the fact that I've spent the last 3 days building a complete picture of Cedric's operation. Bank records, property transfers, shell company registrations, everything. And I'm talking about the fact that I've identified at least $40 million in suspicious transactions over the past 2 years. 40 million? She looked stunned. I thought it was maybe 5 or 6 million. They've been lying to you about the scope of this thing, just like they've been lying about everything else. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out who's been feeding information to the FBI, and then I'm going to use that information to get us out of this mess. How? By giving the FBI something better than a money laundering case, by giving them a corruption case that goes all the way to the top. I left her sitting on the couch, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. The woman I'd married would never have gotten involved in something like this, but the woman sitting in our living room wasn't the person I'd married. She was someone else entirely, someone shaped by fear and greed and the kind of desperation that makes people do things they never thought they were capable of. The question was whether there was enough of the original Veda left to save, and whether I still wanted to save her. Riverside Park at night was exactly as ominous as it sounded. The kind of place where drug deals happened and bodies got found in the morning. But as I walked toward the designated meeting spot, a bench overlooking the water, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I was curious, and curiosity, in my experience, was a much more useful emotion than fear. The figure sitting on the bench was smaller than I'd expected, female, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. As I got closer, I realized I recognized her. Detective Sarah Morrison, I said as I sat down next to her. Mr. Talron. She didn't look at me, keeping her eyes on the water. Thank you for coming. Should I ask how you got my number? Probably not. Detective Morrison had been the lead investigator on a case I'd worked 2 years ago, a city contractor who'd been skimming money from public works projects. She was smart, thorough, and absolutely relentless when she caught the scent of corruption. I assume this is about Cedric Fallon? Among others. She pulled out a manila envelope and set it on the bench between us. We need to talk. The envelope contained photographs, surveillance shots of Cedric entering and leaving various buildings, bank records with highlighted transactions, and, most disturbing, pictures of Veda meeting with people I didn't recognize in locations that definitely weren't law offices. How long have you been watching them? I asked. 14 months. Detective Morrison finally looked at me. But we've been watching you for 6 weeks. Me? Your wife's been telling people you're involved in the operation, that you've been using your forensic accounting skills to help structure the money laundering scheme. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That's not true. I know, but she's been very convincing, especially when she provided documentation that appeared to show your electronic signature on several key financial documents. Forged documentation. We assumed as much, but we needed to be sure. I flipped through the photographs again, studying the faces of Veda's unknown contacts. Who are these people? representatives of various South American business interests, some legitimate, some not so much. Drug money, among other things. Arms dealing, human trafficking, political corruption. Cedric's clients represent a fairly comprehensive catalog of international criminal activity. And my wife is helping them launder their money. Your wife is helping them do a lot more than that. Morrison pulled out another photograph, this one showing Veda in what appeared to be a heated conversation with a man I didn't recognize. She's been providing them with information about federal investigations, grand jury proceedings, and planned law enforcement operations. The world seemed to tilt sideways. How would she have access to that kind of information? Through Marlowe Trasker, he's been cultivating sources in the U.S. Attorney's Office for years, trading favors, sharing information, building relationships that give him advance warning about investigations that might affect his clients. So Marlowe's the leak. Marlowe's one of several leaks, but he's the one with the highest level access. I stared at the photographs, trying to process what I was learning. My wife wasn't just a money launderer. She was actively working to obstruct federal investigations. What do you want from me? We want you to help us build a case that will put all of them away for a very long time. In exchange for? Immunity from prosecution, protection for you and any family members who might be at risk, and a new identity if you decide you want to disappear after this is over. Witness protection, if necessary. I thought about the house with the cracked front steps, the career I'd spent 17 years building, the life that was falling apart piece by piece. What would I have to do? Wear a wire, document conversations, provide us with evidence of ongoing criminal activity. How long? However long it takes. Weeks, maybe months. And if they figure out what I'm doing? Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then you'll probably disappear, permanently. We sat in silence, watching the lights reflect off the water. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Police, ambulance, or fire department responding to someone else's crisis. There's something else, Morrison said finally. What? Your wife's father. The cancer treatment that Cedric promised to arrange for him. What about it? It doesn't exist. The experimental program she thinks he's enrolled in, it's completely fictional. Cedric's been giving him standard chemotherapy and telling your wife it's cutting-edge treatment that costs $200,000. I felt something break inside my chest. Veda's father was a good man, a retired teacher who'd spent 40 years trying to educate kids who didn't want to learn. He'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 6 months ago, and Veda had been desperate to find treatment options that might give him more time. She doesn't know. She doesn't know. Cedric's been using her father's condition to keep her compliant. Every time she's expressed doubts about the operation, he's reminded her about how much the treatment costs and how much she needs the money from their arrangement. So he's been manipulating her through her ailing father. That's exactly what he's been doing. I closed the envelope and handed it back to her. I need some time to think about this. How much time? 24 hours. Mr. Talron, I need to be clear about something. This investigation is moving forward with or without your cooperation. But your wife's level of involvement means she's looking at serious federal charges. Conspiracy, money laundering, obstruction of justice. She could be facing 20 years in prison. Unless I help you build a case against the others. Unless you help us understand exactly how the operation works and who's really in charge. And if I do that, what happens to Veda? That depends on how cooperative she's willing to be once she understands the full scope of what she's gotten involved in. I stood up to leave, then turned back. Detective Morrison? Yes? The person who's been feeding you information about Cedric's operation. It's Rowan Carrick, isn't it? She smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. What makes you think that? Because he's the only one with access to all the financial records and legal documents you'd need to build a case. And because he's the one who's been encouraging everyone else to trust him while positioning himself as indispensable to the operation. You're a smart man, Mr. Talron. Smart enough to know when I'm being played. The question is whether I'm smart enough to figure out how to play back. I walked home through empty streets, thinking about everything I'd learned. My wife was deeper into this than I'd imagined. My marriage was probably over. My career might not survive the scandal. And I was being asked to risk my life to help law enforcement build a case against people who had already demonstrated they were willing to use violence to protect their interests. But as I reached my front door, I realized something else. I wasn't the victim in this story anymore. I was a player, and players got to make choices about how the game ended. The house was dark when I went inside. Veda had left a note on the kitchen table. Gone to think, back tomorrow, we need to figure this out together. I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. We'd had our chance to figure things out together. That chance had ended the moment she decided to betray everything we'd built. Now it was time to figure out how to end this on my terms. I went to my office and pulled out the files I'd been building on Cedric's operation. Detective Morrison was right. This investigation was moving forward, regardless of what I decided to do. But that didn't mean I had to be a passive participant. If Rowan was feeding information to the FBI, then he was vulnerable. If Cedric was manipulating Veda through her father's illness, then he'd made an enemy he didn't know he had. And if Marlowe thought he could destroy my reputation as part of his exit strategy, then he was about to discover that forensic accountants kept very detailed records of their own. I opened my laptop and started typing. If they wanted to play games with my life, they were about to learn that I'd been studying the rules a lot longer than they realized, and unlike them, I actually knew how to win. The story ends here, with Wes having gained crucial intelligence about the full scope of the conspiracy and his wife's deeper involvement than he initially realized. He's discovered that Rowan is the FBI informant, that Cedric has been manipulating Veda through her father's fake cancer treatment, and that the criminal operation is far more extensive than anyone realized. The revelation that Veda has been actively obstructing federal investigations through information from Marlowe represents the final betrayal that transforms Wes from victim to active participant in bringing down the conspiracy. With Detective Morrison's offer of cooperation and the detailed evidence he's compiled, Wes now has the tools and motivation to orchestrate the downfall of everyone who betrayed him, setting up what would be an explosive final confrontation where all the various deceptions and betrayals come to light.